Clashes in Mongkok as bailiffs begin removing barricades. Corrosive liquid attack at 2 fast food outlets.
The grand jury deliberated over 2 days, making their final decision. They determined that no probable cause exists to file any charge against Officer Wilson.
Those of you who are watching tonight understand that there's never an excuse for violence.
And backlash as grand jury decides not to indict white cop over shooting death of black teen in Missouri.
Good evening. Clashes have erupted in Mongkok as bailiffs, assisted by the police, began removing barricades in a section of Argyle Street in accordance with a court injunction. Police took action after some protesters refused to leave the area. At least 32 people have been arrested so far, and the standoff continues this evening. Ronnie Samtani reports.
Tension mounted at around 2:30 in the afternoon, several hours after bailiffs began their clearance operation, as a number of protesters refused to leave Argyle Street.
If you do not stop immediately, police officers will arrest you for suspected criminal contempt of court, resisting or obstructing a public officer, and other offenses.
There was pushing and shoving between police officers and those who insisted on staying. After warning protesters to stop charging police, officers began taking people away. Nearby shops closed their shutters to avoid the chaos. Police tried to disperse the protesters and asked them to move down Portland Street towards Chimsa Choi so that they could reopen the roads. It was just after 3 p.m. when traffic reopened on Argyle Street and some nearby streets. But there were more clashes soon afterwards as protesters tried to rush onto Portland Street. They demanded that police officers open the road for them. The police raised a red banner here warning them to stop charging. More officers arrived at the scene, armed with shields and batons. And as the evening fell, crowds also grew as more people joined the demonstrators, forcing a tense standoff between the two sides. And more scuffles ensued. It began peacefully at around 9:30 this morning when the lawyer representing the minibus company read out the injunction order and gave protesters time to clear out their belongings. Some demonstrators began removing items from the street.
We are not upsetting about losing Mongkok, but we are actually upsetting about the government is not taking their responsibility to answer to the public's democratic request.
When bailiffs and workers moved in to clear out obstacles, protesters raised questions about the injunction in an apparent bid to buy time. But there was no resistance as workers removed the crates and sandbags that formed a barricade across the street. Bailiffs removed the remaining tents one by one until the street was cleared. Ronnie Samtani, TVB News.
Our Ronnie Samtani has been following the developments in Mongkok, and she joins us now live. Ronnie, what's the latest there?
Hi, Sonya. The atmosphere is very intense right now. Just moments ago, police started using tear spray on the protesters to try to disperse them. They've been forcing them further and further down Portland Street, but many of the demonstrators are still refusing to leave. Some of those that were hit with the tear spray were seen running away, screaming in pain, and they were holding their eyes. But a lot of the demonstrators have taken out goggles and umbrellas and have been trying to defend themselves. They are really determined to stay here and are refusing to leave. That's all from me for now. Back to you in the studio.
All right, thanks, Ronnie. That was our Ronnie Samtani reporting live from Mongkok. Now, in a bid to resolve this political impasse, the Chief Secretary for Administration has suggested further talks with student leaders behind closed doors. Diane Toe reports.
Before he left for South Korea, where he's to learn about the development of innovative industries, Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying expressed confidence in the police in enforcing the law in a professional manner. Speaking in the capital city, Chief Secretary for Administration Carrie Lam said the student leaders' demand for Beijing to retract its framework set for Hong Kong's political reform has left no room for further discussion. But she insisted she's not closing the door for further dialogue.
I
really hope to sit down and discuss with them, she said. Maybe it's unnecessary to make the meetings open to public. However, Lam also revealed that there is no date set yet for the report on local sentiment to be submitted to Beijing, which was one of the concessions made by the government in the dialogue with student leaders in October. She pointed out public opinion changes constantly and that she wants a report to be more comprehensive. Meanwhile, the court has rejected an appeal filed by a protester this morning against an injunction by taxi groups to clear a section of Nathan Road between Argyle and Dundas Streets. The taxi group's legal representatives have already posted the court order in newspapers, as well as the site to be cleared as required by the law. Bailiffs could be taking action tomorrow at the earliest. The same protester had earlier tried to appeal the injunction for the Argyle Street section cleared today, but was rejected by the Court of Appeal. Diane To, TVB News.
Now to other news, and 8 people were injured when 2 fast food outlets were targeted in a corrosive liquid attack. Police have arrested a suspect in connection with the case. They're still trying to come up with a motive for the attack, and Liz Yoon has more.
According to the police, a man in his 40s entered a fast food outlet at an industrial building on Tai Yau Street in Sampokong at around 1 p.m. Officers say he splashed corrosive liquid inside the eatery. Both staff and customers were among those hurt. Police say to half an hour later, the suspect made his way to another fast food outlet run by the group in Chiwanshan Shopping Center and splashed corrosive liquid there. Staff gave chase but to no avail. The youngest victim at the 2 eateries is a 4-year-old boy. Some victims suffered burns to their face and arms. Later in the afternoon, police arrested a 46-year-old unemployed man.
We strongly believe that he's targeting the staff because when he threw the corrosive, it's mainly thrown at the staff but accidentally split into the customer.
Chim said that the suspect is neither a former employee nor a regular customer. Liz Yun, TVB News.
Turning overseas, shooting, looting, and setting off fires is now the scene in Ferguson, Missouri. The chaos erupted after a grand jury decided not to charge a white police officer for fatally shooting an unarmed black teenager. The news also triggered pockets of outrage across the United States.
They determined that no probable cause exists to file any charge against Officer Wilson.
That announcement triggered anarchy on the streets of Ferguson. Gunshots rang out and police fired tear gas to push back angry crowds. But it was all in vain. Anger boiled over and protesters began knocking over barricades where police in riot gear stood their ground. Rioters started pelting police with objects while screaming and calling them murderers. At least a dozen buildings were set on fire. They also torched a battery of cars. People waving guns were seen running wild on the streets. Despite their profound disappointment, the family of victim Michael Brown and President Barack Obama called for calm.
But I join Michael's parents in asking anyone who protests this decision to do so peacefully.
The disgusted masses truly believe a trigger-happy white police officer just got away with murdering an unarmed black teenager. But a mixed black and white grand jury disagreed. They determined Officer Darren Wilson had just cause to shoot 18-year-old Brown this past August, a decision authorities insist should be respected.
They are the only people who have heard and examined every witness and every piece of evidence.
The governor of Missouri assured residents they're trying to keep the peace.
The men and women of the National Guard will also be in the area to provide security at critical facilities.
But there was no semblance of peace. In between the clashes of protesters and police, storefront windows were smashed in and looters helped themselves. Across the nation, thousands of people express outrage over the news, but they exercise restraint in cities like Los Angeles, New York, and Chicago.
The search is on for a new U.S. Secretary of Defense after Chuck Hagel announced he is stepping down from the post. The abrupt resignation is the first major shakeup to President Barack Obama's cabinet since his Democrats were routed in midterm elections 3 weeks ago. James Aiken reports.
After less than 2 years on the job, Chuck Hagel submitted his resignation to the president, a decision Barack Obama says was mutual.
Let me just say that Chuck is and has been a great friend of mine. I've known him, admired him, and trusted him for nearly a decade, since I was a green behind-the-ears freshman senator.
It's been the greatest privilege of my life, the greatest privilege of my life to lead, and most important, to serve with the men and women of the Defense Department and support their families. I am immensely proud of what we've accomplished during this time.
Hagel leaves a post in which he struggled to break through the White House's insular team of national security advisors. Analysts say there were times during the crisis in Ukraine and the rampage by Islamic State in Syria and Iraq when it appeared Hagel and the administration were not on the same page.
There were times even when Secretary Hagel appeared to be disagreeing even with Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Martin Dempsey, and that's never a good place to be.
Hagel, a Vietnam War veteran and longtime Republican senator, oversaw major initiatives on nuclear weapons management and reforms to the military that included efforts to combat sexual harassment.
I don't think the Pentagon could have had a finer soldier and public servant leading it.
Removing Hagel allows Obama to reboot his national security team as he faces several overseas challenges in his final 2 years in office. Among the leading contenders to replace Hagel is Michelle Flournoy, who was passed over for the job 20 months ago. The former Undersecretary of Defense is among the most senior female officials in the Pentagon and has a long history with Obama. Hagel will remain on the job until a successor is confirmed by the Senate, which probably won't happen before February. James Aiken, TVB News.
And still ahead in our news, a hardship facing young people these days. Deadline to seal Iran nuclear deal extended. And Aston Villa's drought continues.
They work, they socialize, though sometimes they prefer to avoid large groups. They give gifts, they play, they do drugs. Tonight, Dolphins, Spy in the Pod at 9:30 on Pearl Spectacular.
Capture full HD video resolution at 60 frames per second. With a tilting flexible monitor and integrated Wi-Fi to create and share instantly. Unleash your inspiration with the 24.3 megapixel FX format DSLR. I am a D750. I am full freedom. I am a Nikon.
We're all born to protect. But for me, it's a calling. John was hit by a car and fell into a coma. With a financial consultant's help, we used the newspaper to speed up the claim. So John's family could focus less on their finances and more on his recovery. I work for AXA. My calling is to protect people.
Discover other stories on axa.com.hk. AXA, redefining standards.
The time now is 7:44.